candidate running for president of Belarus. And then before that, and of course, had to flee the country as a result of those efforts. And before that, set up a high-tech park, and then was the ambassador from Belarus to the United States, and also worked in the very beginning in the Lukashenko administration. So the floor is yours. It looks like you have an excellent PowerPoint. We're looking forward to seeing that.
Really, I haven't seen it, frankly speaking.
Oh, you haven't? Well, it's a good one.
We were quite busy here in Washington, D.C., so just quite a number of meetings.
If you speak to the green dot, then the people online will see you. So here's the...
okay, yeah. So, yeah, the people online can see me, okay.
Yeah, you can just change the slides there. So, yeah, if you speak for about 30 minutes, then we'll have some time for discussion.
Okay. Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for your time with us. And well, again, we apologize for a little bit delay of our meeting, since we were in the State Department, met quite influential and quite nice people. So I had just recently today very fruitful discussion with John Bolton. Probably you know the person who was the former National Security Advisor and was Under Secretary of State. And I just was in the State Department, and I remember that I was the only foreigner who was invited for his swearing-in ceremony because we got acquainted at the time when he was the Vice President of American Enterprise Institute, not high official position. And even at that time, we were thinking and discussing the future of our region, the future of the countries of the former Soviet Union. And we worked out different scenarios of the globalization of the conflict in Central Eurasia. But even at that time, we couldn't predict that it would be anything like the war between Russia and Ukraine. The countries, the people, the nations that considered to be very close to each other. And again, even in the biggest nightmare, we could not imagine that the war could be started. I noticed that this is just a serious trend, and I think that many scholars notice this trend, that we see the rise of the authoritarian leaders throughout the world. We see how Putin became an authoritarian leader, and if someone would observe the decision-making process, he's one of the top officials of the Putin administration, Sergei Naryshkin. He behaved himself like a bad schoolboy, trying to guess what his boss wanted from him, because, Putin publicly humiliated one of his top officials, because he could not understand and he couldn't guess the real intention of his real boss. Then we see now the trend in China that gradually is becoming, from a totalitarian country, an authoritarian regime. And when we try to put distinctions between totalitarian regime and authoritarian, it means, first of all, that totalitarian regimes are sometimes the rules of the game. So it should be definitely an ideology behind it or underneath of any totalitarian regime. The system of social lift, you may say that Chinese communism or the Soviet communism is a bad thing. However, they were very clear and very understandable for all of the people living in this country, the rules of the rules of engagement and the way how you can make a career and so on and so forth. And definitely the ideology that was far beyond certain individuals. And in China, it worked perfectly well until now. And until now, what we see? Until now, we see that China is gradually moving from a totalitarian country into authoritarian regime. It means that now we are not talking about ideology, but a person who is depicted as a savior of the country, as a natural leader, as somebody who is above all others, above even ideology, because he can dictate the way how the country will be evolving, how the country would be developing. And this is the problem which China probably would face in the nearest future, the same way as it happened with the Soviet Union, when Gorbachev, instead of being one of the top 12 members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, started to focus attention on himself. And he appeared everywhere. He appeared to be a leader in the West and inside also. And by diminishing other members of the Communist Party. And it brought to a very poor result for the country. The country was disintegrated and ceased to exist. So now what do we have? Oh, by the way, just you probably know the very good Chinese saying, Chinese proverb, that it's better to be a dog during the times of stability than a human being during the times of changes. So, just I belong to a very lucky generation that lived through very, very different stages of changes. And I remember definitely the time when it was a standstill between the Soviet Union and the United States of America, clash of ideologies, and both countries were fighting all over the globe for the dominance of their ideologies. And we were even prepared for the nuclear war. At least both of the countries were trained, the population was trained to be prepared if, for instance, nuclear weapons could be used. And then perestroika came, the Soviet Union collapsed. And in 1995, it was a very, very idealistic picture that I saw by myself. I visited, it was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And I saw a very idealistic picture when very, very many global leaders came together at that time. They all came to Moscow. And it was really interesting to see that Bill Clinton, the former allies and the former competitors or even enemies, I would say, they were sitting at the same table discussing the same things. And Bill Clinton was there. In fact, I was introduced to him for the first time. And also Helmut Kohl from Germany, Francois Mitterrand, John Major, well, all these leaders were sitting together at one table, and at the next table from me, there were just Tansu Çiller, the Prime Minister of Turkey. She sat next to the Levon Ter-Petrosyan, the President of Armenia, and they were sitting and chatting together. And from time to time, Ter-Petrosyan ran to the table where we were sitting, like supporting staff, and he asked whether I mind or not if he would smoke a cigarette. He didn't want to irritate the pretty Turkish leader, Turkish lady, with his bad habits. So, he smoked every like half an hour during the whole period of this reception, nice reception. But the very fact that they were sitting together, they were discussing things, just it gave a lot of optimism, in fact. And I also visited several sites when the Partnership for Peace program started to work, when the NATO countries, they organized the joint exercise, military exercise, with the armies from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, just they had joint military exercises. And when the Cooperative Threat Reduction Treaty was fulfilled, the so-called program of non-Lugar program, that the infrastructure and the weapons of mass destructions were destroyed. So this was a pretty optimistic period of time when Francis Fukuyama even wrote an interesting article which was called The End of the History. I don't know, probably, I'm sure that, just if you study international relations and politology, just these two trends in fact, existed simultaneously. The first one was the article, the essay of Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilization, just that he tried to predict the inevitable clash between different civilizations. And the second one was, just the end of the history. We believe that really it could be the victory of liberalism all over the world. And in fact, these two trends, they still exist. The first trend is the trend towards globalization. And the second trend is the trend towards nationalism. And also, well, communist idea as an idea that was also universal, the same way as the liberal idea. And both of them were trying to balance between nationalism and particularization and globalization. Though both these ideologies see it differently, however, it was a big challenge, and for liberalism also, just how to balance these two trends existing in human nature, existing in the world, and that again, that was very interesting and very challenging story. But now, what we see now we see this conflict between Russia and Ukraine that again brought us back to the idea of the clash of civilization, let me put it this way. So the challenging question is whether it really means that it's a crisis of liberalism and Fukuyama was wrong. I think he predicted a very interesting thing from my viewpoint, that with the modern warfare, you cannot reach any results anymore. And I think that this is due because of the technological revolution that started around 1970s with the invention of the computer, and especially when we started the widespread of computer, then the invention of internet, mobile phones, and so on and so forth. So the process of globalization was in fact started to be much more speedy. And we noticed also just within the last decade, I can give you one very simple example, very simple, very visible example, that natural resources and the land now do not play the role it used to play even in the middle of the 20th century. Because before the technological revolution, when you start a war, you can get either human resources or land or natural resources. And this was the reason why many countries were entering the war. So what you can achieve now? The reason I'm telling that is because Russia is speculating on their TV, and this was in fact one of the reasons they started the war with Ukraine, is that West, or the collective West, thought about conquering Russia's enormous Russian vast natural resources. But was it the case? Well, let me just give you one example. In 2007, the market cap of the largest and probably most well-known company, that is called Gazprom, was $350 billion US. Before the war with Ukraine, I don't know, because now, just we cannot make an assessment of the real market capitalization, because now it's more speculative. But before they started the war, the market cap was of Gazprom was $65 billion US. So at the time of 2007, Gazprom was the fifth biggest company in the world, probably even bigger, among the fifth largest companies in the world, with Microsoft somewhere nearby. Now the market cap of Microsoft and Google is 30 times more than the market cap of Gazprom. Individual, I mean, not both of these companies, but each, Microsoft and just and Google or Alphabet, you call it now, we call it now. So just each of them has market capitalization 30 times bigger. Apple 40 times bigger than Gazprom. So when you are thinking about even entering or getting these resources, you may think that why, just because the same interest like we are having about the renewable sources of energy, the same thing we can say about the companies that can renew its intellectual and industrial potential. So because what would happen with Gazprom in 20 years when gas will be finished? Just market cap probably will be even lower. And what would be with the companies that would continue to regenerate knowledges and so on and so forth? Maybe the market cap will be even higher. So Fukuyama, in fact, was right. Just he predicted some very, very important thing that, that you cannot now in the modern world conquer anything significantly if you conquer the land, if you conquer natural resources. Because the biggest value of every country is innovation system, is whether it can reproduce the knowledge, the doing business, and other things that has nothing to do with the natural resources. And you cannot conquer the investment climate, because if you would come and if you would conquer the country with a good investment climate, it means that, just this good investment climate would just vanish. So another example, just I do not, unfortunately, I haven't seen this presentation, but just imagine, just believe what I would tell you. Just in 1965, it was a small island called Singapore. It was just an island that was separated from the whole Malaysia by a river. And they were thrown from the Malaysian Federation. And I saw the chronicle, the documentaries about how the leader at that time, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, proclaimed the country's independence. He was crying. I mean, if you would see the chronicle, you would see that he was chewing, just something this way, but he was literally crying, and not of happiness, not of joy. It was not that like all over the country, people with some slogans, cheered that, just we finally became independent. No, he cried because he made very simple calculations. And, he thought, okay, fine, what resources do we have for Singapore to be independent country? First of all, oil. Well, they don't have any oil, and they didn't have any oil. Gas, they didn't have any gas, and they don't have any gas. Okay, they do not have wood, just if they would like to have, because the soil was very bad, just for even wood to be grown. So they also didn't have the sand for construction, and they also didn't have even fresh water. So they had to buy fresh water from overseas because they didn't have fresh water. The only thing that they have in big numbers, I mean, the biggest resources that they have were mosquitoes. They had a lot of mosquitoes, but that was not a good thing to attract foreign investor, So, and when he analyzed all these factors, he, and by the way, external factors also don't forget, please, because it was Malaysia, hostile and hostile Indonesia, two neighbors, that looked at Chinese with anger, and they were not happy, and they, in fact, Singapore was thrown because of the Chinese sentiments growing in Malaysia. So, he was crying because he came to a conclusion that as an independent state, Singapore would not be able to survive. So, but then he created a right investment climate. He created, just a good infrastructure, attracted a lot of investments, and, Singapore not only survived, this is one of the prosperous nations, not only in Southeast Asia, This is one of the prosperous nations in the world. Within one generation, they moved from the dockers, from workers, just in a port workers, just to a nation of bankers, people with finance, intellectuals, working with their very famous biotech hub, and just they became scholars, scientists, engineers, and this is only with one generation. Just if you think about it, you understand how big leap forward they made. And as a matter of fact, he became the tutor, for Deng Xiaoping. Just several times he visited Singapore and vice versa. The Singapore leader visited China, and they started reforms in China. But we will talk a little bit later about China. But just imagine that someone today, by the way, the GDP of Singapore is 350 billion US dollars today. And if you take the country with a dictatorial regime, like the Republic of Belarus, we have the largest potassium reserves in the world. We have the biggest forests that are now in big demand because of the renewable sources of energy, and we can export this wood to Scandinavia, to Germany. We have a lot of other things, natural resources. The population is 2 times bigger than the population of Singapore, and the land is 300 times bigger than the territory of Singapore. The GDP of Belarus is 55 billion US dollars. It means 6 times less than in Singapore. So just think about that. If you would like to conquer something, you can conquer Belarus, but not big value. But you cannot conquer anything in Singapore, because it's just a piece of land. If without the whole infrastructure, without the right management, without all the ecosystem that was created there, you only conquer a small island, which later would be full with mosquitoes again. Just this is the reason we are trying to understand why Russia is trying to conquer Ukraine, what they can achieve. So this is probably a question that all of us are thinking, because in terms of individual gains, for instance, if I'm a Russian soldier, and I should be somehow motivated to go and fight with Ukrainians, what individual gain I can have? Germans, when they started the World War II, they had the so-called General Plan Ost. Not very many people know about it, because the events on a battlefield overshadowed the real intentions of the German soldier. But the real intention was that they would come and they would get a piece of land in Belarus, in Ukraine, in the Baltic states, and in Crimea. This territory were actually inside this General Plan Ost. The Hitler administration allocated 4 billion Reichsmarks, which was quite a significant number of money, in order to build the right infrastructure for future settlers, for German farmers that would be there. And many times I saw the information that a German soldier, a German officer, he kept a small brochure where there were citations of Nietzsche, "Thus spoke Zarathustra." But in fact, this was not the case. Very many German soldiers, they kept the brochure how to grow crops, how to deal with the pigs, how to make a pig farm or a cow farm, and so on and so forth. So, because the families in agriculture in rural areas were very big in Germany, the families were like 8-10 children, and the farm can only be inherited by a senior son. They were so many people that industry, even very rapidly developing industry, could not absorb. So each of them had very high motivation to go. However, in Russia, what motivation you can have? As I'm an individual, land, come on, Russia has 1,000 times more land than Ukraine. Just go and be settled somewhere in Russia if the Russian government would give you this. Then in terms of the country, okay, fine, probably you can get some extra land, but why do you need that? It's just, the land that practically doesn't have an importance. Yes, it's agricultural land, but, it's not that strategically important. And, just many times I'm asked whether Belarusians would be involved. Just this is quite a tricky question that is asked by many Ukrainian experts. And well, it's pretty understandable because they worry about the possibility of being attacked from the north, from the territory of Belarus. And that is very understandable. However, I do not believe that it can be again attacked from the territory of Belarus. For, again, very clear reasons, because forget about Russian explanation about the denazification or demilitarization. We all understand that this is just, a lip service. Well, what denazification you are talking about if a Jewish comic, just was unilaterally elected in the country as the president, so it doesn't make any sense. As per demilitarization, we could not say that, in terms of hardware, Ukrainian army was up to date, they had the same old Soviet weapons, probably even older than they had in Russia. So if Putin would say, and he could say it openly, that we are here only to get a piece of land, that would be probably a fair answer. And, the fair answer would be, listen, it worked very well in 2014 when we got some land from Ukraine, and I was easily elected by Russians. So that was, in fact, the main reason, from my viewpoint, to get a piece of land, which Russia, in fact, doesn't need, but in fact, to demonstrate that he is a tough guy and to be re-elected easily again in 2024, which would be a crucial turning point in the Russian politics. As for Belarus, we cannot get even this, because even land, on the west of Belarus, we can get only the wetlands when very few people live, and the only resource that you can get in this wetland is cranberries, but you cannot go to war for cranberries, and even not, you cannot grow them on farm, but they're wild cranberries, which is very difficult to collect. And the second is that if you can take Chernobyl territories in Ukraine, also no interest. I was in charge of demarcation and the delimitation of borders with Lithuania, with Latvia, and with Ukraine. And, just when these discussions took place, I remember, especially with Lithuania, we thoroughly draw the line between Belarus and Lithuania, just discussing about the fate of every village, whom it should belong, talking to people inside these villages, whom do they feel closer, whether they feel themselves as Lithuanians or Belarusians. So it was a very, very difficult procedure. And with Latvia, it was a little bit more easier. But anyway, also, they were negotiations. But with Ukraine, we just sit down, we draw a line. Nobody cared if it's 10 kilometers one way or another, because the territories were useless. So, in terms of territory, Belarus cannot get anything. And therefore, there is no motivation for them to go. It's very low motivation for Russians. And you see that when it was when Russia started its aggression, there were a long line of Ukrainians that wanted to be conscripted, that wanted to be drafted. You know, there were so many volunteers wanted to go to war that Ukrainian army said, no, sorry, we cannot absorb that many people. So just have a gun, and just in case the enemy would come to the city, then every house will become our fortress. But, you know, in Russia, when they declared this, draft, 300,000 people were drafted, but 350,000, they escaped immediately the territory of Russia. But altogether, you know, just 2 million people, they are just in internal immigration. They hide somewhere with the ranchos, dachas, I don't know how to say it, the rural areas, you know, just switched off their phones. So it's about 2 million young men, you know, just they disappeared from the economic life of Russia. So it means that the morality is very, very low. So what the result of this war, I would not go, you know, just into details telling the things that the democracy even better and the way of managing even the army in the most conservative structures, when Ukrainians act in small units where they can take initiative on themselves, and Russian army is highly centralized. And this is the reason they sent generals to the front line, and 10 generals were killed already, which is a huge number for this type of warfare. So in Russia, the generals took a decision that, you know, a lieutenant or captain in the Ukrainian army can take. So this is basically a big difference, and small units appear to be more efficient, the same way as small units appear to be more efficient in business now. When Americans at the end of the century, they formulated the motto "small is beautiful." When Steve Jobs, even inside big corporation, he divided the company into different teams that compete with each other, even inside the big corporation. So we can see a big fail of Russia. 2024 will be a decisive point for Russia. And I don't think personally that Putin will be able to survive. Because the Russian history showed that the lost in a war, I mean, not even directly lost in a war, but the inefficient wars led to serious internal changes. I would like to recall you the Crimean War of 1856, when Russia was defeated by French and British army. And the result of it were a very serious movement inside Russia, which led to the abolition of serfdom, which existed in Russia at that time. Then the loss to Japanese fleet in Tsushima, Far East. You know, just for Russians, theoretically speaking, especially in the beginning of the 19th century, in the 20th century, this was somewhere far, far away. You know, just it was like a historic notion. It was, you know, just we didn't have aviation at the time. You know, just and the proximity now, the world, because of transportation, the world became much smaller, because we can reach even very distinct points, countries, and so on within a very short period of time. At that time, it was a notion. However, the revolution started in 2005, and it lasted for 2 years until Stolypin launched the agrarian reform, just copy-pasted from the famous Homestead Act by Abraham Lincoln, which in fact also helped him to win the Civil War in the United States of America, because the majority of the population in the country were peasants, and when they were given the life perspective to become landowners, just their attention was switched, and then the revolution was over. They lost in the First World War of Russia, 1917, led to the democratic revolution first in February of 1917, and then the October coup. That was a different story, but anyway, just now, and it was not a direct, lost. Nobody came and occupied Moscow or St. Petersburg, it was somewhere on the periphery of the process of, on the periphery of the country. However, it influenced directly the internal situation, and it brought to the to serious reforms and to the change of power. And the last thing, just when we are talking about some similarities, because I can see a lot of similarities between the strange war that China started in 1978 against Vietnam. In fact, this was the first and probably the only the only war between socialist countries. It was funny because back then, we said that it's impossible that socialist countries would fight against each other. So, but what was the reason? Why Chinese moved? They also occupied, probably 100 kilometers. They moved inside the territory of Vietnam. Then they stopped. They were, by the way, Buchas, Irpin, just these two villages where we can remind us the events of the Nazi atrocities during the Second World War. And but also the Buchas in Irpin happened. There, Bucha and Irpin, they have different names, definitely in Vietnam. But also Chinese army acted the same way as Russian army acted on the territory of Ukraine. And then they retreated. This was very strange war. But I think that the reason of this war was it has a lot of similarities. It had a lot of similarities with the current war of Russia against Ukraine. However, on the core of this war, it was different. I think that at that time, Deng Xiaoping, he wanted to convince the members of the Communist Party, the leadership of the Communist Party, that they had to change the course and start the reform. And even the biggest in terms of human potential army in the world can be very ineffective in a modern warfare against the troops of Vietnam. So, and they started reforms, definitely. After this strange war, the reforms in China was launched. We know now the results. I can speak a lot of it. I'm sorry, I took more time probably than you expected from me. So I will give the floor to the respected professor, and just maybe you have some questions. It just very within the very short period of time, definitely you cannot tell anything, and right. It could be for several lectures in a row, but that's all at this time.
That was very good, very good summary and lots of interesting points. So let me open the floor to questions, and then I'll also open the floor for questions on Zoom as well. So if you have a question here in the audience, please raise your hand and ask. And if you have a question on Zoom, you could either, I think, put it in the chat, and I'll try and see it on the chat, and I'll read it to our speaker. See.
So everything was crystal clear, right?
Well, that's impossible. I'm sure we must have some questions. Yaroslav, you must have a question.
No, thank you. Maybe let us return to the title of your presentation. So I will be glad to hear more about this triangle, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, because we hear a lot about China, Vietnam, Singapore, but not so much about these three countries. So What do you think about, for instance, how much Belarusians support this war? Because you know that Russians are seriously supportive. And what do you think about Belarus?
Well, yeah, you are absolutely right that the events that are happening now should be considered in this triangle. Russians on the surface, and in the beginning, every population in the beginning support its army. It's by definition. And then they start to see whether it was well managed, whether it was successful, and just what result it can achieve. As per population of Russia, yes, the population of Russia supported it. However, the fact that 2 million people disappeared, just one thing is to support verbally, but absolutely different stories to take a gun and to take for the cause. So I tried to show that even statistic can be very deluding. And as a matter of fact, any public sociology, in fact, sociology as a science doesn't exist in totalitarian country. Just you can not make any public survey, and not only because it's forbidden. In Belarus, if you ask me whether Belarus population support this aggression, and nobody can say, because if you would like to make a public survey, you will be put into prison up to 7 years. So if, for instance, if you are located somewhere overseas and you would start asking people by phone, they will never tell you the truth. So, as for Belarus population, Belarusians has nothing to do with this aggression. Russians, their opinion is, reflected not by the public polls, but by the actions and their reactions towards the draft. And, I personally believe that it's very clear now, and it's very understandable now how it will end. We don't know whether Ukrainians will be able by this spring to free the territories that were occupied by Russia from February 24. But it doesn't matter now, because the problem now will be not on the front, that Ukraine acts much more efficiently. The problem will not be from Belarus, because Belarus army they let me return back a little bit, because before this aggression, Belarusian army, they were believed that Russian army is the second most strongest army in the world. So they looked with admiration towards Russian army, because the Russian army was something that was depicted by Russian propaganda. And they really didn't mind if they would become the part of the second army in the world. Now the situation is completely different, because now Belarus army, they look with admiration at the Ukrainian army. And, it's a kind of a change of mentality inside law enforcement agencies inside Belarus army, if you are interested in this position. And Lukashenko would never enter the war because they could be two scenarios how Belarus army would act. The first scenario is that they will immediately give up when they would cross the border. And the second scenario is that they will turn weapons to the north rather than to the south. I mean, to the north, not against Russia, but against the illegitimate regime that illegally holds the power on the territory of Belarus. So this is basically very simple triangle that we have. And I think that we will be able to see the results of this aggression very soon. But the result, the bigger events will not happen now on the front line. The biggest events will happen inside Russia, as close the election will be. So, just now we have come with the initiative to organize online elections in Belarus, because we understand that free and fair elections are impossible in Belarus and they're impossible in Russia. So, just the idea of online election is to create a legitimate body in the eyes of Belarus people to organize even a referendum around who is, for instance, Lukashenko is a criminal who reached the elections and stole the rights of Belarus people to elect the leadership, or he's a savior, like he tries to portray himself. So, if this experiment will work, then, just it can be extrapolated to Russia in 2024, when I think Putin would, he doesn't have any options, but, well, he does. In fact, there are a couple of options for him. The first one is that he will run again. He will run again. And that both of these dictatorial regimes existing in Belarus and in Russia, they know how to marginalize opposition, how to marginalize the opposition on the left, and how to marginalize the opposition on the right, national-oriented opposition and liberal opposition. So they marginalize the way like, just these people, they do not have experience, they live all their life on grants, they never manage any serious companies, and they were not a part of the state, and so on and so forth. So the biggest threat to the regime came in 2020 in Belarus from inside. So from the establishment. I created the largest IT cluster in Central and Eastern Europe. Another contender was the manager of a big bank. And that regime had no idea what to do. It didn't register us, then it was another story. But in Russia, who would challenge Putin? He marginalized and put into prison the potential contenders. Navalny is sitting in prison. Many people also in Russia are pushed away from the country. However, when the challenge would come from inside, from the people whom we very well know, but whom we have no idea who would declare their intention to run for the president, and they would be the biggest threat to Putin's power. He may declare the military regime and try to postpone elections. That's also an option. However, I think it would be even better, because when his legal term will come to an end, he will completely lose the legitimacy in the eyes even of his inner circle. And, all the coup then would be very easy and very possible scenarios. And, just what they did, Russians in eastern regions of Ukraine, they made a referendum. And the result of the referendum, it's 90% in favor of Russia. However, everybody knows that it's just, nothing to do with the reality. However, just this is necessary even for the dictatorial regime to create even the image of a legal substantiation for, just for being this territory annexed. So well, that's a very possible scenario if you're talking about 2024. And this is in fact a triangle. The triangle is very interesting also in the case of Belarus interconnection or interrelation with Russia, because we are under the Russian propaganda and because we speak the same language, and Belarusian people can be easily manipulated. However, the opposite is also true, because since we speak Russian language, we can influence Russian population. And that was happened in 2020, when half of the auditorium of Facebook put an image on their photo is white, red, and white flags. This is a flag of Belarus resistance movement in 2020. Half of the Russian auditorium of Belarus. And when I launched the initiative to arrest Lukashenko and started to raise money for that, the majority of the people who donated money for this initiative were from Russia. So just the good example for that, if we would take in Russia, it would be extrapolated and can influence the Russian story. So Belarus, to this extent, can be considered as an experimental lab for future Russian events.
Okay, so we have several questions on Zoom if you want to stay there. So let me try and summarize a few of the questions. The first one is, does the war help the opposition in Belarus, or does it help Putin sort of, gain more control over Belarus? And then a second question is, what is the internal political situation in Belarus, and is there a real possibility of Lukashenko leaving power in the short term? So how do you see the war affecting the internal politics of Belarus, the relative strength of the opposition and the president?
Just many people in Belarus, and I spoke with some of the Russian politologists, they believe that the role of Lukashenko in the beginning of this war should not be underestimated. Because you remember that starting from 2020, the focus of the world community was on Belarus, especially during the time of COVID. And Belarus fought also with COVID, but with vodka, sauna, and tractor. Just these were the recipes of fighting COVID in Belarus. And, when the whole world was in isolation, in Belarus were the movements, and therefore the whole attention of the global community was towards Belarus. So for Lukashenko, it was in his interest to switch the attention towards other problem, towards other geographical location, and at the same time to use this war, the participation in this war, to tackle Belarus opposition, to tackle Belarus democratic movement. So to a certain extent, he succeeded, because now the focus really of the global community is on this war. If Russia would be successful in moving towards Ukraine, towards Kyiv, Belarus forces would definitely enter after that, and no doubts about it, because Lukashenko also would probably like to take an advantage of, just Russian successful attack towards Ukraine. Now it's impossible, as I say, because nobody would like to go and die for nothing. He created the situation that definitely opposition and no one inside the country can openly act. But this is in a short term. In long term, since the war is very unsuccessful to Russia, that Lukashenko is directly, not directly, but indirectly, is involved in this aggression on the side of aggressor, that he even worked as he deluded even Ukrainians about the real intentions. And, he gave an interview right before aggression saying that no one soldier would come from the territory, would attack the territory of Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. He swore it publicly on TV. So it was an act of disinformation from his side, that Ukrainians should be relaxed and, just not to be prepared for the attacks from the north. However, in the long term, in the long run, I think that, the unsuccessful war of Russia against Ukraine would help us to change the situation in Belarus, because Lukashenko, he doesn't have any public support inside the country. And the only way he can stay in power, he could stay in power, is because of the support from the side of Kremlin. So Putin was the first person who recognized his reached election, though everybody understood that they were fake. but Putin recognized it. And on top of that, he gave 1.5 billion to Lukashenko in cash in order probably to bribe some military, just so he could use it at his own favor in order to keep the power. And that, in fact, was the only way that he could stay in power at the time when the military were, shaking. They didn't know what side to take, whether to take a side of the people or whether to take the side of Lukashenko, of the current regime. But when they saw a direct support from Kremlin, again, they had the admiration towards Russia, towards its army, towards its military capabilities. So, they took a side of him. So definitely the failure, and even if the processes inside Russia will start, the social process will start to brew, then the similar things will happen in Belarus.
Okay. So I think, I don't know if there's any more questions, we'll probably run out of time. So if there's, I guess maybe the final question I'd like to ask myself is, to what extent does the war, I mean, if Lukashenko's power is completely dependent on money coming from Russia and support from Putin, does that make it possible for Putin to take over Belarus? And is Putin interested in that and absorbing Belarus into Russia, instead of a union state, just a single state? See that happen?
Very good question, and it's very hard to answer. Because, well, definitely his intentions could be to absorb, to take Belarus. Though Belarus formally was an independent country from 1917, and, so even if he could do that, just it could be only a short-term solution. Because, in order to absorb the country, he needs to make it legitimately nice. And it means that referendum should be organized, and it would, again, revitalize public activity, demonstrations, and so on and so forth. Well, he could definitely do it the same way as he did it with the two regional cities of Ukraine. This is also a possible scenario, but it will be just fun to everybody, and nobody would consider it as a legitimate act. So I think that Putin probably, and most probably, he had intention not only to take a part of Ukraine, he also had an intention to take Belarus, and even there were very serious speculation about his desire to take Baltic states. Mm-hmm. Even they are a part of NATO. So he just wanted at that time to test the reaction of the West toward his occupation of Ukraine. And if it would be very fast, if it would be very easy, and Ukraine would become a part of Russia, or at least the half of Ukraine would become a part of Russia, then he would definitely annex Belarus, and then he would go to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, having a firm belief that the West wouldn't intervene because he possesses nuclear weapons. Mm. But it appears to be that, just these scenarios cannot be considered as realistic any longer.
Right. Well, that's a happy note to end on. So please join me in thanking the speaker for a wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed that. Let me just shake this. I guess I'll take care of it. So I don't know.